places that time refuses to forget, empty corridors that whisper secrets, rooms where echoes of the past still resonate, shadows that have never really disappeared. Abandoned hospitals are not just ruins of concrete and rusty iron. They are monuments to suffering, to pain, and sometimes to something much worse. This is a journey through the dark mysteries of places where life and death have crossed paths, and where what has been left behind may be waiting for you. Story 1. The Echoes of the Abandoned Ward. It began with a lingering silence that seemed to swallow every sound, a silence so profound it made even the creaking of an old building seem like a distant memory. Late one stormy night, an urban explorer, driven by both curiosity and an insatiable thirst for forbidden knowledge, ventured into an old, deserted hospital. This was no ordinary building. It had long been shrouded in rumour and neglect, its name whispered in hushed tones by locals who dared not tread its crumbling halls. The once sterile corridors now lay in ruin, their walls marred by peeling paint and thick layers of dust that danced in the meagre light. Every step echoed in the vast emptiness, as if the building itself resented the intrusion. The only source of illumination was his flickering flashlight, a weak beam that barely pierced the inky darkness, revealing only fragments of long-forgotten decay. Cautiously, he made his way down a long, narrow hallway. The air was cold and heavy, and with each step he could feel the oppressive weight of the past pressing against him. That's when he noticed an inexplicable echo, a soft, indistinct murmur that vibrated off the cold concrete walls. It wasn't the howling wind outside, nor was it the natural groan of a collapsing structure. It was something else entirely, something that seemed to whisper forgotten names and lost hopes into the void. Intrigued and unnerved, he pushed open a creaking door and entered a ward where rows of empty patient beds loomed like silent witnesses to past tragedies. The room was dimly lit by the weak glow of moonlight filtering through broken windows. At first, nothing overtly supernatural occurred, but as he advanced further, the echo grew louder, morphing into a series of faint voices. They spoke in broken, garbled phrases, too distorted to fully comprehend, yet laden with profound sorrow and despair. Each whispered word sent a chill racing down his spine, as if the very walls were trying to share their dark secrets. Every step he took intensified the oppressive atmosphere. In one particularly heavy moment of stillness, he thought he saw a figure clad in a worn hospital gown, standing motionless at the far end of the room. He blinked rapidly, and when his vision cleared, the figure had vanished, leaving behind nothing but a lingering sense of grief and dread. It was as if the hospital held more than just faded memories. It possessed a palpable, tormented presence that defied explanation. Determined to uncover the source of these inexplicable phenomena, the explorer began recording everything. His camera, trembling slightly in his hands, captured fleeting images of shadowy figures moving behind shattered windows and doors that inexplicably creaked open by themselves. In one sequence, his lens caught a brief glimpse of what appeared to be a pale face, its eyes hollow and haunting, staring right at him from a dark corner before melting back into the shadows. With each passing second, he questioned whether his mind was playing tricks on him, or if something truly otherworldly lurked within these forsaken halls. As the night wore on, the voices grew more insistent. Footsteps, soft at first, then growing steadily louder, echoed in the distance, as if a group of long-forgotten patients were wandering the halls in perpetual torment. The rhythm of their steps seemed to sync with his pounding heart, which now beat as if trying to escape its confines. He felt as if the very air was charged with the anguish and despair of countless souls, each one desperate to be heard. In a particularly harrowing moment, while standing in the deserted ward, he sensed an overwhelming presence. It was not something that could be seen, but it was undeniably there, a force that made the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. His mind raced through possible explanations. Was it the residual energy of those who had suffered here, or perhaps something that had never left this place at all? Time seemed to stretch into infinity as he absorbed the oppressive atmosphere of the hospital. Every rustle of paper, every distant creak, and every flicker of his dying flashlight seemed to affirm that the building was alive with a sorrowful, vengeful spirit. The explorer's determination wavered under the relentless weight of terror and curiosity. He knew that whatever haunted this abandoned ward was not merely a figment of his imagination, but an echo of a darker past, a past that refused to fade quietly into oblivion. Finally, with a mixture of terror and grim resolve, he turned to leave. As he stepped back into the cold night air, the hospital loomed behind him, silent yet accusatory. In the distance, the soft murmur of voices and the echo of footsteps seemed to follow him, as if the building itself was reluctant to let go of its secrets. The whispers persisted long after he had disappeared into the stormy darkness, a reminder that some mysteries are bound by time and memory, destined to haunt those brave enough to seek them. Story 2. The Mirror in the Corridor. An abandoned hospital keeps echoes of its troubled past in the most unexpected places. Its weather-dried walls whisper stories that no one dares to tell. And in a forgotten corridor, lit only by a wavering lamp, a lonely traveller found himself drawn to a dusty, ornate mirror mounted on the wall like a forgotten scar on the building. The glass was cracked, stained by the passage of time, and stood out from the sterile, decaying environment. Something about the twisted frame evoked a sense of displacement, as if that object didn't belong there, or worse, as if its presence was a relic of something that should never have been forgotten. That night, at exactly 3 a.m, the traveller woke up with a start. A shiver ran down his spine, an overwhelming feeling that he was being watched. His heart hammered in his chest as he got up, and almost against his will walked back to the corridor where the mirror rested. The corridors were plunged into a suffocating silence, broken only by the echo of his own footsteps. Then the sound came. A light touch, almost imperceptible. A faint, insistent knock, as if something was trying to attract her attention on the other side of the mirror. He hesitated. His pale, frightened reflection stared back at him, but he wasn't alone. Behind him a shadow moved slowly, a figure without defined contours, but whose presence was undeniable. It was as if the mirror was more than just an object, as if it had become a rift between the present and something much older and much darker. For a long moment the traveller remained motionless, trapped between disbelief and terror. The surface of the mirror rippled slightly, as if it were water disturbed by an invisible touch. The sound of the knock became louder, more rhythmic. 3 knocks, a pause. 3 more knocks. The pattern of a code he couldn't decipher. His hands were shaking as he reached into his pocket and pulled out his cell phone. He needed to record it. He needed to prove to himself that he wasn't crazy. He pointed the camera at the mirror and pressed the record button. The screen showed his own upset face. The reflection flickered, unstable, as if the mirror was struggling to maintain its connection with reality. The shadow in the background seemed sharper now, outlined by the dim light from the corridor, and then something appeared on the surface of the glass. A word, written in spectral calligraphy, as if an invisible finger had traced the letters in the accumulated dust. Back. The traveller stifled a scream and stumbled backwards, the cell phone slipping from his fingers. The word remained there for a second longer before disappearing, sucked back into nothingness. But the knock continued, stronger, more urgent. That's when he realized something that made his blood run cold. The sound was no longer coming from inside the mirror. It was coming from the corridor, from behind him. He turned with a sudden movement, his breath caught in his throat. Nothing. Just the dense, oppressive darkness of the abandoned hospital, but the sound was there, and it was getting closer. Without hesitation, he turned and ran. His footsteps echoed down the corridor as he moved away from the mirror, the shadow and that ominous message. When he finally reached the hospital exit, gasping with dread, the world outside seemed absurdly normal. The cold, early morning wind, the silence broken only by the rustling of dry leaves. But then he heard it, softly, almost a whisper carried by the wind, the same pattern of knocks. 3 knocks, pause, 3 more knocks. The mirror was still there, hanging on the wall of the forgotten corridor, waiting, watching, and its silent message echoed in the darkness like an eternal challenge to anyone who dared to face it. Some secrets never die. They just wait for the right moment to be discovered again. Story 3. The Vanishing Patient. In a long-forgotten wing of an abandoned hospital, where peeling walls and broken windows told tales of decay, a lone investigator ventured out to document the unsolved mysteries hidden there. The corridors had witnessed unspeakable events, and every creak in the floorboards seemed to whisper the pain of the departed. That night, when the clock struck exactly 3 a.m, the investigator walked through the desolate corridors, with only the dim light of his flashlight to guide him. The air was heavy with the smell of mould and abandonment. He passed empty rooms, where crumbling hospital beds still held the last remnants of lives hastily left behind, faded photographs, faded clothes, letters that would never be read again. It was in one of these rooms that he found a filing cabinet covered in a thick layer of dust. With hesitant fingers he began to leaf through the yellowed records. They were old records, full of names and dates, fragmented stories of patients who had once occupied those beds. However, one file caught his eye. There was no name, just the enigmatic annotation, Patient X. The pages inside the file were incomplete. Confusing notes filled the margins, strange symbols scribbled next to incoherent medical reports. He barely had time to process it when an unexpected noise echoed down the corridor. A dragging sound, low and slow. Something was moving. A shiver ran down his spine. Clutching the flashlight in trembling hands, he followed the sound. The corridor seemed to narrow as he advanced. Elongated shadows flickered across the cracked floor, dancing to the rhythm of the wavering light. At the end of the corridor, an ajar door creaked, moving on its own. Beyond it, there was only darkness. But something inside was moving. Indistinct figures swayed in the dark, as if space itself had been corrupted. The investigator's heart was pounding in his ears. He advanced with hesitant steps, his breath short. When he finally bent down to look into the room, a sudden movement chilled his blood. A pale, fuzzy figure glided swiftly through the door, soundlessly, weightlessly, like a whisper from another world. He tried to focus his vision, to raise the camera, to capture any evidence of what he had seen, but just as it appeared, the figure disappeared, consumed by the pitch black. No sign of its presence, no evidence other than his own dread. With a trembling voice he called out in the dark, hoping for an answer. Nothing, just overwhelming silence. The only sound that remained was his panting and the distant echo of something dragging, even deeper into the darkness. He clutched the camera to his chest and stepped back. Later, when he checked the recordings, all he found was static. Sparse shadows flickered across the screen, fragments that defied any logical explanation. The patient X file was still with him, but it offered no answers, just a silent invitation to return. However, as he left that forgotten ward behind, he noticed something that made his skin crawl. The sound of dragging footsteps, no longer distant, no longer lost in the empty corridors. This time, he was right behind him. The investigation ended with no concrete answers, only the certainty that, in that cursed hospital, the past was not dead. He had been waiting, and now he knew he had been seen. The lights go out. The corridors return to silence, but the stories never end. Some secrets remain buried, others continue to lurk, waiting for those daring enough to seek answers. But beware. In abandoned hospitals, not everything left behind is really dead. If you've come this far, you've heard the whispers, and now they've heard you too. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like. Maybe that's enough to keep the darkness at bay. Or maybe it's just drawn even more attention.